Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Athletics Podcast. I'm joined today by Dr. Mike Benson, President-elect at Coastal Carolina University. And Dr. Benson, thanks for joining me on the Higher Ed Athletics Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Travis. I commend you for all the good you're doing. I've been listening to some of your past episodes, and to follow people like Bridget Burns and Charlie Cobb, and even my friend Scott Wyatt at Southern Utah is a real honor. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you being on, and it's been interesting to see the podcast develop, but I was really happy to be able to catch you before you get busy with your next presidency starting in January, right?
Yeah, and Inside Higher Ed did a little blurb. I didn't know this, but this is my fourth presidency, which my wife and kids joke that I can't hold down a job very long, but I started when I was young, 36, but I think fourth presidency is fairly rare. I'm like in 1.5% of the population of university presidents out there, but we've loved every place we've been, and we're making our way from the west to the east, and we love Southeast, and we're really excited about going to South Carolina.
Well, I was thinking about that too, and you were really young when you started. You're almost like just showing that you really care about term limits, and you just go on after you hit almost 8 years, you move on. But I mean, you've clearly done great work at all your institutions, and I think you're more than double the average tenure of a college president, I believe, right?
So I got to start working for Bernie Matchin at Utah, who had come from Utah from Michigan, where he was provost, and then went from Utah to Florida, where he had a really good tenure. But I was his assistant, got my first presidency when I was 36, stayed there for 5 years, and then my next two in subsequent order, Southern Utah and then Eastern Kentucky, were both 6.5 years. So that's a little above average. My friend and mentor who wrote the foreword to my book, Gordon Gee, still has me by a few years and presidencies. He's back at West Virginia. I visited him a few weeks ago. But he's, I think, in many ways is the paragon of what a college president can do, and how active he is, and he's been a great exemplar to me my entire career, and I'm really grateful for his friendship. But yeah, he started young too. He started when he was 36.
Yeah, he's got some decades on you, but two things. One thing that's similar to both of you is your engagement with students, because I think when I first started following you on Twitter, you were doing your high school tours, and I saw an interview, plan on doing that again. And then Gordon Gee is known for being really interactive with the students too. So that's good to see, and not really surprising to hear as a mentor of yours.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, he's a terrific fellow, and I think he used to show up at frat parties too. I haven't done that, but the high school tours, and students have contacted me via Twitter for a whole host of things, everything from inviting to events or telling me about their cables out in their residence hall, and I always try and direct them to the right resource. But as you know, today's college student really wants access to administrators, and I try and set an example for all of the administrative teams that I've led. That's really important. We can't appear like we're kind of sequestered off in the ivory tower to be accessible. And as I've tell students all the time, were it not for you, we wouldn't be here. We don't have jobs, institutions don't exist if it weren't for students. And we have to sometimes, I think, remind ourselves, because of all the kind of ancillary noise out there, that at the end of the day, this is about the product you're producing for students, and education that is worth their while and produces results for them in the future.
Yeah, I agree. Working in athletics, we always talk about how if we didn't have our student athletes, none of us would be here. But so that's good. That's a good philosophy, and I'm glad to hear it. So this is for higher ed athletics. So those wanting to know the athletic questions, we're going to get to those. But I do want to start off with a couple of higher education questions. But first, I'm just curious. Many might be aware that Coastal Carolina University was part of the University of South Carolina system up until 1993, which is why CCU is nicknamed the Chanticleers, to keep with its rooster roots of the USC Gamecocks. So did you know how to pronounce the school nickname correctly at first, and did it actually come up in the interview process? Because I don't think I even pronounced it right.
Well, they're doing these little spots, I think, ESPN, about the proper pronunciation. They asked me to participate, which I was happy to do. But I used to say Chanticleers, but it's Chanticleers, and it comes from Geoffrey Chaucer and Canterbury's Tale. There's a very fierce rooster that they've taken that name from him, that character. And yeah, they wanted some separation from USC because they became independent. The roots trace back to 1954, but its independence is more contemporary than that. And the Gamecock, as you can appreciate in South Carolina, is everywhere. There are a lot of course, Clemson and USC fans, and we've dealt with some of that in Kentucky, in Eastern Kentucky, with UK up the road 20 miles, of course, University of Louisville, 90 miles to our west. So it was important for them to carve out an identity that was unique. And Chanticleer is the only mascot of its kind in America. It may be the only team that has teal, hashtag Teal Nation, as their primary color. So it's a really unique place. It hasn't been around too long, but boy, there's a tradition and a foundation that I really come to appreciate in a short amount of time. We hope to build on that.
Yeah, and the Shanties is, I saw the easier way to say the nickname. So
Yeah.
the Shanties, as we talked about before the recording, football having their game relocated, but we'll get to some of that success that you've all had in a little bit and how you can capitalize on it. I want to talk first about your latest book. So you're no stranger to the writing process, but you have a new book called Gilman at Hopkins: The Birth of the Modern American Research University. I'll definitely be picking it up. It's with John Hopkins University Press. So what has that research and writing process been this time for you, and why did you decide the book needed to be written now?
I'll answer the second part first. A colleague and I were at Hopkins. This was a couple of years ago, we went to the bookstore and I asked him for a biography of Daniel Coy Gilman, who was the first president. He was no stranger to administration. He had been at Yale, Yale-trained geographer who worked at the Sheffield Scientific School, had secured for Yale Morrill Land Grant monies in the 1860s. And that reputation and his accomplishments led to his being recruited as the third president of the University of California. And he did that from 1872 to 1874. So when Johns Hopkins died and left $8 million, which at the time, Travis, was the largest gift in the history of American higher education, you had the Rockefellers, the Stanfords, the Vanderbilts follow up shortly thereafter. But it was unknown to give that kind of money to two entities. It was a hospital and a university. And so when I asked for a copy of a biography, the sales associate at the bookstore said, "Well, there isn't one. No one's written it." And I just had the temerity and maybe it was enough to think that I could pitch it to Johns Hopkins Press, which I did. And they said, "Yeah, we'd like to have you take a shot at it." So there have been books written on him and his tenure, because if you look at the model at Hopkins, they took the British template, if you will, of teaching and the seminar method, and they combined it with the German model of primary research and producing research by faculty and put them together. And they did it in a way that nobody had tried before. And in my book, I talk about the fact that they started the longest continuously run university press in America is Hopkins. They started kind of learned journals and periodicals at different departments, whether chemistry or philology or a lot of other subjects. They started fellowships. Nobody's granting fellowships to graduate students. So they really had their pick of the litter, as it were, for graduate students that wanted to pursue postgraduate study. And then, of course, they started the first teaching hospital in America when they opened the hospital in 1889, then opened the medical school in 1893. And there was a condition on the gift from the woman who gave it to start medical school that women had to be admitted every bit as equally as men of the same standards. So the first class of doctors, medical students, 20 students, and 4 of them were female. So when I got into the research of Gilman, I thought there was so much more to him than I knew about, and not only his time in California, but also after Hopkins, Andrew Carnegie recruited him to be the first president of the Carnegie Institution in Washington, D.C. So a really remarkable man. And, we talk about Charles Eliot, you talk about Andrew White, you talk about other presidents at other places, and I don't think he really got his due historically. Really a remarkable individual. And when you get into a life like this, you really kind of adopt him in many ways. You start reading the journals and the correspondence. And I think my family, my kids especially, are probably done with Gilman anecdotes around the dinner table. But it's been a great process. In terms of the process, I took a sabbatical starting in January, stepped down in Eastern Kentucky, and then the COVID hit, the pandemic and the lockdown. So I had literally the library to myself from middle of March until the middle part of the summer. And that was incredibly productive. So I want to thank my colleagues and friends at EKU for providing me this great space in the library. That's where I'm coming to you from today. And I was very productive because I had no other kind of things to distract me. And I just hunkered every day and researched and wrote.
Yeah, I've been seeing your tweets about the library access, and know you've been hard at work. In my doctoral program. I'm in a higher ed history class right now, and so we've been learning about John Hopkins and in that time period too. So it's definitely time sensitive that I kind of saw you put this book out, and I can't wait for it to come out and definitely be reading it. Might have to have you back on. You won't be in between presidencies, so you'll probably be a little busy, but we'll have you back on and maybe talk more about the book.
Well, I appreciate that. It's should come out, I hope, fall of next year. It's got 2 more chapters to edit. My editor's doing a terrific job, and then off to the publisher for the kind of final refinement. So keep an eye out. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I will. Well, so you mentioned this a little earlier. Before the independence of from USC, Coastal Carolina is a relatively young institution in the grand scheme of things. So does the finished product, you going through the Gilman at Hopkins, does that sort of re-inspire you as you start a new presidency at Coastal Carolina and kind of help what you think the university could become, since it still can be shaped as far as coming out of everything going on right now, but the fact that it's also still relatively young?
That's a good question, and I've given that some thought. Hopkins launched in 1876 with the primary goal or aspiration to be a fundamental research university. Sure, their faculty were going to teach, and they were going to be proficient teachers, but they were going to engage graduate students and produce primary research. That was what Gilman said. Our first and foremost responsibility is to discover, refine, disseminate, and apply new research, new knowledge for the betterment of society. Coastal is a little different from that. They're not a research university. They do some sponsored grants, but you look at around the world today, and the Times and this came out with their world global rankings of the top 20 universities in the world. 14 are American. We are still the envy of the entire world when it comes to research universities. Now, we have a lot of other deficits in other areas, but people come from far and wide to our institutions because of the reputation, because of the opportunities, because of the chances to, in some ways, monetize what is developed on a campus. You think of, and there's a great book out there, Jonathan Cole, who used to be I don't know if you've run across that book in your studies. He was provost at Columbia. And he talks about all the things that have come out of research universities, whether it's Cumaden from the University of Wisconsin, computers. A lot of schools lay claim to developing the first computer, the algorithm from Google at Stanford, the nicotine patch from UCLA. You can just go through and tick off all these things that every day you and I benefit, maybe unsuspectingly, from these developments that have come off of a research university campus. And Coastal is kind of, they found their sweet spot. They are the state's public liberal arts and sciences university. Their competition is a little bit down the road, the College of Charleston, but they have a lot of things going for them that maybe kind of close that margin of what they want to be in the future. That's not to say they will develop into a research university, but for now, they are about teaching. They're about getting the best possible education to students at a really good price. And they offer a few, 3 or 4 PhD programs, one in marine science, which given their situation and circumstances and topography, it's a perfect degree for that area. So we're excited to fit in, and we hope to fit in there and help them certainly recognize their aspirational institutional goals. But they're in a good spot, and our goal is to make it even better.
Yeah, and speaking of inventions and things being created, since I'm an IU person, Indiana University, I have to mention Crest toothpaste.
Yeah.
That's an Indiana one. So if anyone woke up this morning brushing their teeth with Crest, you can thank Indiana
Uh,
University
Well, if
research.
you knock back a Gatorade, of course, that comes from the University of Florida. So there are all sorts of things out there that, again, every day you pick off the shelf or you use it. You turn on your TV. Television, FM radio were developed on a university campus. So we could go on, but look up that book, The Great American University, is by Jonathan Cole.
I will. There could almost be a podcast just on inventions from American higher ed research. Maybe we'll do a spinoff. Uh, so in your year apart from a college presidency, or almost a year, whenever you begin your new one, has that given you a chance to sort of study other institutions' plans in dealing with their coronavirus decisions? I know you were really focused on research of a book, but since you admittedly didn't have you weren't able to go very many other places, your mind maybe couldn't avoid focusing on that. I also know you served in a little bit of an advisory role still. So if so, what have you learned that you think you'll be able to take with to the job of what needs to happen in January at Coastal?
Another good question. And yes, I'm a student of higher ed. I've been in it for 25 plus years, as a president for almost 19. So I was ready for a break, but you can't, certainly you can separate yourself from it, but still is all around you. And being right here on campus, I was very mindful of what was happening right here at EKU. And I commend my successor, Dave McFadden, and his team for doing a really, I think, a terrific job in navigating some uncharted territory. I've paid attention to what schools that have done really well. Um, Maybe some that have struggled. I think communication. Sometimes you think, well, we're over communicating, but I don't think you can. Students will kind of pick and choose how they get their information, whether it's on social media or on campus messages or emails or that sort of thing. But keeping people apprised of what's going on, why you're doing it, and making sure it dovetails with local, state um, kind of regulations or practices or suggestions or mandates. I'll give you a good example. I went to Baltimore to do some research, and I could because I have a faculty appointment there this year. But I was amazed in Kentucky that the mask mandate hasn't or did not take for the first week or so. People are doing a lot better now, but in Baltimore, everybody wore a mask, and there was complete compliance across the board. I went to work out at Orange Theory Fitness, and you wore your mask going from station to station. Every part of the country is different. I know there have been some hot spots. Our relatives are still out in Utah, and they've really relaxed restrictions there because they haven't had a spike. But then all of a sudden, students come back to campus, and they come from different parts of the country, and there are spikes. I've been worried about those college towns where there's that indigenous population that has tried to stay healthy. Then all of a sudden, you have this influx of faculty, staff, and students that um, I don't want to say they haven't been careful, but things just happen and gatherings happen. And look at John Jenkins. I have a degree from Notre Dame, and I've just watched how he's up the road from you all, but he's just absolutely been lambasted for not wearing a mask, and he contracted the virus. And so I'm not here to be critical or say, hey, how stupid are you, or you shouldn't do that. We have to comport ourselves the way that we believe is the best, but it also has to be kind of within the confines of what our local health officials and governmental officials have told us we should do. So I've paid attention. I've noticed that those schools that have had an online presence for a while, and it's not new to them, the faculty haven't been nearly as surprised. It's pretty tough to take a course and think you can kind of transport it and over to online, and voila, there it just happens. The magic happens. I've taught online, and it's a challenge. And I'm taking 2 classes online now through Hopkins, and both of my professors are superb, but it takes a lot of work. And so those campuses that have had the infrastructure for a while with virtual delivery, I think are doing even better. And on the other side of this, will be even better situated. But to answer your question kind of succinctly here, Travis, I've talked a lot, but I think it really is about communication and making sure students feel that they can be safe. The parents feel that their sons, daughters, and grandsons and granddaughters are safe. But I know Harvard and other places will probably use case studies in the years ahead to look back once we're past to say this school did it particularly well. This one, what can we learn?
Yeah, I think communication is a good transition to my next question. I mentioned that you stayed on as an advisory role while you're at EKU as well. Um, you seem to be entering a similar situation at Coastal Carolina, where the retiring president will be there with you for the rest of the academic year. So, how important is that for the incoming president? And maybe more importantly, probably more importantly, what does that do for the entire university community to have both there during a transition? Because I just got done reading a research article where it talked about the difficulties of stopping and starting projects and fundraising projects between presidencies. So I'm guessing that will kind of help ease the transition. What does that mean for you all and Coastal to be able to have both of you there?
Well, first off, David has become a good friend. We met each other through the process of our applying to be that final member in the Sun Belt, and on balance, they had some advantages that we didn't have, and they won that spot. I've told the committee when I interviewed, I was a little salty toward Coastal there for a while, given that we lost out and they won, but they've taken advantage of that conference affiliation, and so I've stayed in touch with David. He and I sit on the presidential forum for the NCAA together. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact that he's willing to stay around and help me. I don't have all the answers. I've been at this for a while, but there are certain management and leadership principles I think that are transportable, and you can take them from place to place. But they're also individuals. There are personalities. There are kind of idiosyncrasies to a place, nuances that if you don't have someone that can help you understand maybe the politics of Columbia, South Carolina, or what goes on in Horry County, where the campus is located, you're going to be at a real disadvantage. So I'm really looking forward to having David around for these next 6 months. And he and I met last week. I'll be back down there again week after next, and I really appreciate his willingness to do this. And I think it speaks to the fact that a recent study said I think 30 to 40% of university presidents have announced that they intend to step down. So the graying presidency is very much a real thing when I say step down within the next 2 to 3 years. So I would hope that these presidents, whether they are the ones that have been there in their offices for a while, will be willing to help kind of bring along that next generation, because I'm a big believer in succession management and making sure you're taking care of the place that you're entrusted to lead.
Yeah, it seems there's been, whether planned or not planned, a lot of presidents announcing retirement at the end of this academic year, and President McRobbie at Indiana University has also announced that his retirement, but I believe that was planned for a while. So it'll be interesting just to see if that new generation comes up and where they come from and what positions they come from and what those transitions will be. So
Yep,
that
exactly.
part would be interesting. This one, just to follow up on that, whenever you mentioned the new community and the new county, so when you go to a new place, as someone that's obviously has an interest in history, are you not only asking people, but are you doing research on what that institution's been like over the years and like what that community's been like? Because I'm guessing that'll give you some sense going into the position. Is that something you've done and you recommend to people?
Yeah, if you don't know the history of a place and appreciate sacrifices made by a lot of people to get that institution to where it is, look, none of us come into these positions in a vacuum. People have put in a lot of sweat equity to get that institution to where it is. I found that when I went to Southern Utah, certainly when I came here to Eastern Kentucky, and when I got to Coastal, when we got to Horry County, one of the first things I tried to do was track down a history of the place, and they've been nice enough to pass along a few more. Here's the one I have right here in my book, excuse me, on my desk. So there's the first, this was written a few years ago, the first 50 years. They're going to commemorate their 75th anniversary as an independent institution in 2029. So I've told them, you only have these historical markers every so often, and you certainly have to take advantage of the kind of propitiousness of that moment to do marketing, to do maybe a capital campaign, a strategic plan, that sort of thing. So we really want to focus on the history of the place. And that said, Travis, you also have to, I've understood too, a lot of people say, well, that's the way we've done it around here. I certainly honor the past and appreciate the traditions that a place might have. But at days end, a president has to come in and be willing to say, well, you may have done it that way, but here's a fresh set of eyes and a new perspective. And maybe we should try something a little bit different. And that can be difficult. That can be a hard thing sometimes for the people that have been there for a while. But, I've never been, I did take a class at Southern Utah when I was there, finishing a master's degree. But I won't be a graduate of EKU. I probably won't be a graduate of CCU. But that doesn't mean I can't love the institutions as much as the alumni do. And you do honor to them and to the place by coming to love the people and the traditions, but also building on what is in place and trying to improve things moving forward.
Yeah, one thing that I found this book at a used bookstore. It's called Being Lucky. It's Herman B. Wells, and it's one of his autobiographies about how he helped build IU, and that gave me just a sense of appreciation while I was a student and before I became an employee at IU. I work in the athletic department there too, and just seeing the history of what one president's perspective is of he was taking train to go pick faculty to try and convince them to go to IU. And then you just get a sense and appreciation of all these different history items. And so that's why I asked that, because it's just helped me as a student appreciate it more. If I'm going to study higher education, I really wanted to understand my surroundings and a little bit about that, which IU is going through some problems with a former president with history but having this book like that really makes me appreciate things. So that's good to see that you believe that too.
Let me add too. A lot of places will have oral histories, and they'll do taped interviews. I found a site on the Coastal website where they had done oral histories of people that helped with the founding, faculty that had been there for years, administrators, community folks, a couple of media people that had covered the historical arc of the place. And I'd encourage your listeners, if you're in a place where you have a special collections or the libraries put together those oral histories, many times those are the best ways to really find out the nuts and bolts of a place. And I found those tremendously helpful. They were all videos that I would listen to when I was driving or other downtime. And I found that they made me conversant with the names, the places, historical dates, the markers, as it were, along that path. So track those down at your special collections at your respective institutions.